There are moments in life that feel like emotional freefall. The texts stop, the calls vanish, the person who once felt like oxygen now feels like a ghost, and in that aching void we begin to panic. We mistake silence for absence. We assume God has walked away, or worse, forgotten us. But what if the silence is holy? What if the pause, the space between heartbreak and healing, is not where God disappears, but where He draws closest? You see, we live in a world that worships immediacy. We want answers, closure, comfort now. But God doesn't operate in our noise. He moves in stillness. He doesn't compete with chaos, He silences it. And when He stops the noise in your life, when He allows the connection to break, the conversation to end, or the romance to unravel, it's not cruelty. It's divine precision, because love, in its purest form, begins in that quiet. Philosophically, love is not merely passion. It is purpose wrapped in commitment. It's not the butterflies or the chemistry. It's the conscious choice to show up, even when it's hard. Real love is not a fever dream, it's an awakening. It forces you to see not just the other person, but yourself. And that's where the silence becomes sacred. Psychologically, many of us attach to people not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of being unseen, fear of sitting with our own emptiness, and so we pour ourselves into romantic chaos, hoping someone else's affection will drown out our inner ache. But when God loves you, He doesn't allow you to stay addicted to dysfunction. He will pull you out of toxic patterns, even if it breaks your heart. Why? Because He's not interested in giving you what feels good. He wants to give you what heals. That healing often begins with a pause, a divine interruption, a breakup that doesn't make sense, a quiet season where the only voice left is His. And in that stillness, the Holy Spirit whispers truth. You are still loved, even without them, even in the silence. This is where your identity is rebuilt not through attention, but through transformation. The pause becomes a furnace. And in that furnace, love is refined, not just your love for others, but your understanding of what it truly means to be loved. Because love that is rooted in truth will always require discipline. It demands vulnerability, yes, but also wisdom. It asks for sacrifice, not just for the other person, but for your own growth. It doesn't idolize feelings. It integrates responsibility. It says, I will love, not because it feels good, but because I've counted the cost. This is how love shapes our moral compass. In choosing to stay honest when it's easier to lie, to remain kind when bitterness would be justified, to forgive when resentment feels deserved, and yet we must confront the danger of reducing love to fleeting pleasure. Because when love becomes nothing more than a dopamine hit, we lose its essence. We confuse desire for devotion, and we settle for intensity over intimacy. But God calls us deeper. He teaches us to love not in idealism, but in integrity. Not despite someone's flaws, but because we recognize that we, too, are deeply flawed, and yet wholly loved. This is the shared burden of being human, to love through the mess, not just through the magic. So when God pulls you into the silence, don't resist it. Don't rush to fill the void, sit in it, listen, because the silence isn't empty, it's full of Him. And in that stillness, you'll find a love that doesn't just thrill, it transforms. There is a sacred ache in waiting, a place where silence isn't absence and delay isn't denial. It's where God teaches us that true love is not rushed, and intimacy worth having is intimacy worth preparing for. Love, in its purest form, is not a feeling that sweeps you off your feet. It's a choice that roots you in the ground, a decision you make in the quiet, a discipline you embrace when the emotions wane. It is courage, it is responsibility. It is the holy act of saying, I will show up. Not just when it's easy, but when it's excruciating. But what happens when God puts love on hold, when He delays the relationship, when the feelings don't line up, when the connection you prayed for suddenly feels like a closed door? In our humanity, we grieve, we spiral. We assume that waiting means something is wrong with us, or worse, that something is wrong with God. But love, as a fundamental organizing principle of the human soul, doesn't always arrive in the form we want when we want it. And that's by design. Philosophically, love is not merely a response to pleasure. It is a moral commitment to the betterment of another's soul, sometimes at the expense of our own convenience. It is not passive, it is not weak. It is a voluntary act of inner strength where we submit our desire to divine timing. Because in the wait, God is not just working on the person you're praying for. He's working on you. Psychologically, the delay exposes our deepest attachments. It reveals where we've equated love with validation, where we've idolized being chosen instead of becoming someone who can choose rightly. The pause is painful, but it is not punishment. It is purification. You begin to learn that vulnerability is not recklessness. It's sacred openness wrapped in wisdom. You stop demanding perfection in another and begin confronting the chaos within yourself, the broken patterns, the insecurity, the need to be needed. And somewhere in that transformation, you realize the wait wasn't about holding love. It was about shaping your capacity to give and receive it rightly. We live in a culture that has reduced love to experience, to chemistry, compatibility, or conquest. But this hedonistic view leads us to chase intensity over intimacy. We jump from one emotional high to the next, always consuming, never cultivating. But real love, God, ordained, soul, maturing, destiny-altering love, requires work. It demands patience. It flows from truth, not fantasy, from discipline, not indulgence, and it grows only when both people are willing to sacrifice comfort for growth. So how do we navigate the tension between unconditional love and human imperfection? We stop waiting for someone perfect and start learning to love someone honestly, not with illusions, not with rescue fantasies, but with the sober understanding that to love someone is to take on the weight of their humanity, to embrace their flaws as part of the shared burden of being, and to say, I see you not as a project but as a person, and I choose you, not because you complete me, but because I have allowed God to complete me first. That is where heaven meets the heart. That is where God moves, in the space between your longing and His leading. So if your heart feels paused, don't run. Don't force it. Don't chase what's not appointed. Wait well, because when God places love on hold, it's never wasted time. It's holy preparation. And when the wait ends, when the right moment comes, what you'll have won't just be love. It will be love refined by fire, ready for forever. Sometimes the most loving thing God can do for your heart is separate it from the wrong person, from the wrong pattern, from the emotional noise you thought was love, but was really only a distraction. We rarely understand it in the moment. The withdrawal feels like abandonment. The quiet feels like punishment. But the God who is love doesn't pull us away to break us. He pulls us away to rebuild us. This is emotional detox. It's where God begins to purify our understanding of love, not just as fleeting passion, not as romance wrapped in fantasy, but as a sacred force that organizes the very architecture of our being. Love is not random, it is not indulgence, it is intentional design. It's a fire that, when stewarded, can refine, not destroy. The soul. Psychologically, our culture has conditioned us to chase feelings. We're told that love is chemistry, that passion is the highest form of intimacy. But what happens when the dopamine wears off? when the emotional high crashes into reality. That's when many people walk away. Why? Because they confused emotional chaos for connection. They confused being wanted with being known. But real love doesn't live in drama. It lives in discipline, and discipline is born in the detox. When God gently removes every false source of intimacy so he can reconnect us to what's true. Philosophically, love is not just affection, it's allegiance, a conscious choice to show up even when it hurts, even when it demands more than it gives. To love is to embrace responsibility for the soul of another without losing the truth of your own. And in that responsibility, you discover your identity, not because someone else completed you, but because the act of loving rightly revealed who you truly are. But to get there, God often has to first undo our distorted definitions. He confronts the lies we've believed that love should never hurt, that boundaries are unspiritual, that unconditional love means unlimited access. No, unconditional love is not permission to tolerate dysfunction. It is not spiritual codependency. It is clarity, strength, and honor. Even in heartbreak, in this detox, God doesn't just extract you from the wrong relationship. He extracts the wrong version of you, the version that was performing for approval, addicted to attention, afraid of rejection. He replaces it with someone who can love with open hands, not clenched fists. Someone who can give without losing. Someone who can stay when it's right, and walk away when it's not without confusing distance for failure. And this detox reveals something else. To love someone rightly, you must love them in reality, not in potential. Because the tension between unconditional love and human imperfection is not solved by fantasy, it's lived out in fidelity. You don't love someone despite their flaws. You love them because you recognize your own. And in that shared burden of being, a sacred empathy is born. This is why God pulls you away, to clean your lens, to quiet your cravings, to make room for the kind of love that doesn't just excite you, but exalts you. Because when love is grounded in truth, it transforms. When it is rooted in discipline, it builds. And when it's anchored in God's design, it lasts. So, if you're in the pause, in the separation, in the emotional detox, don't resist it. This isn't rejection. It's refinement, and on the other side of it is a love you're finally ready to carry. We live in a world that confuses exit for freedom. When things get hard, we run. When people disappoint us, we ghost. When love demands more than it gives, we label it toxic and walk away. But true love, God-shaped love, was never meant to be an escape. It was always meant to be a fire. Not a wildfire that consumes recklessly, but a refining fire that burns away selfishness, pride, and fear until only truth remains. Love is not found in the fleeing, it is found in the facing our own brokenness, facing another's imperfection, facing the holy responsibility of saying, I choose to stay, to grow, to give, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Psychologically, we are wired to pursue pleasure and avoid pain. It's human nature, but love isn't about instinct. It's about intention. It's not driven by what feels good in the moment, but by what forms good over a lifetime. That's where so many get lost. They equate love with intensity, when in reality, love's true power is in its consistency. The rush fades, the butterflies disappear, and all that's left is your character. Philosophically, love is the courageous act of standing in the chaos of relationship and still choosing truth. It's not a spontaneous emotion. It's a structured devotion, a disciplined surrender of ego for the sake of intimacy. Because in every real relationship you will encounter chaos, not because something is wrong, but because you are both human. And humans are complex, wounded, layered souls trying to love through the fog of trauma and expectation. This is why love demands vulnerability, not the Instagram version of being real. but the sacred kind that says, "Here I am, flawed, frightened, but still willing." And here's where it gets radical. You love not by avoiding flaws, but by embracing them. Not as defects to fix, but as burdens to carry together. Think of Christ. His love did not shrink back from our brokenness. It entered into it. He didn't love us despite our sin. He loved us through it, and unto transformation, that is the standard. So why do we run the moment things feel uncomfortable? Because we've been sold a cheap version of love, a hedonistic counterfeit that tells us love is supposed to feel good all the time. That if you cry too much, or fight too much, or grow too slowly, it must not be your person. But what if your person is the one who doesn't give up? What if they're the one who sees your mess, your fear, your inconsistency, and still says, "Let's do the work together"? That kind of love doesn't just change relationships. It changes you. You become someone who doesn't panic when things aren't perfect. Someone who doesn't need constant highs to stay committed. Someone who can walk through the fire and come out holy. This is the love that develops our moral foundation. It teaches us patience when we want to react. It calls us to gentleness when we want to blame, and it compels us to stay, even when walking away would feel easier. So how do we love in a world that chooses escape? We choose to remain. We look into the imperfections not with resentment but with reverence. We don't idolize potential. We don't fantasize perfection. We love in reality, raw, present, faithful. Because in the fire, God doesn't just preserve love, He purifies it. And when we choose love in the fire, we don't just find someone worth fighting for. We find the truest version of ourselves. There is a sacred burden to being human, a heaviness we carry not just in our own soul, but in the silent cries of those we try to love. This burden is not the weight of perfection, it's the cost of presence. It's what happens when two souls collide in all their beauty, fragility, fear, and longing. And love, true, divine, Christ-centered love, is not the escape from that burden, it's the courageous choice to carry it together. We've misunderstood love. We've glamorized it into something easy, transactional, even disposable. We say we love, but often what we mean is, "I love how you make me feel." And when that feeling shifts, we withdraw. We label the discomfort as a sign to walk away rather than an invitation to dig deeper. But love, as a principle, not just an emotion, is far more demanding and far more liberating. Psychologically, love confronts the core of who we are. It forces us to leave behind the self-protective mechanisms we've built from childhood, the fear of rejection, the obsession with control, the walls of emotional self-preservation. Love demands vulnerability, not selective transparency, but full exposure. Not just being seen, but letting yourself be known. That kind of love, voluntary, sacrificial, faithful, isn't natural. It's supernatural, and that's exactly what makes it holy. Philosophically, love is not merely an act of desire. It is an act of the will. It is the conscious decision to align yourself with another person's reality, even when that reality isn't comfortable. Even when it brings inconvenience, heartbreak, or confusion. To love is to tether your being to another soul, not for what you can extract from them, but for what you can build with them. And this is where the true test comes, because the moment you stop romanticizing someone is the moment you start loving them. When the sparkle fades, when the fantasy dissolves, when the imperfections start to surface and you stay, not out of obligation, not out of desperation, but out of devotion, you begin to love not despite their flaws, but because of the shared burden of being. You recognize your own brokenness in theirs, and instead of using it as a weapon, you allow it to birth compassion. You don't idolize potential, you honor process. and in doing so you become a witness not just to their journey but to your own transformation. Now, here lies the danger. If we reduce love to hedonism, if we chase only the pleasure, the passion, the emotional highs, we will forever run from the very thing that could save us. We will leave when it gets hard, assume the problem is always external, and never face the truth. You cannot be refined by a love you refuse to remain in. This is where the Spirit of God meets us, in the tension, in the chaos, in the contradiction between what we want and what we need. He teaches us that unconditional love is not permission for abuse, but a posture of grace and growth. It doesn't deny boundaries, it honors them. It doesn't ignore pain, it transforms it. And so we ask, how do we love when it hurts? We remember the cross, the place where divine love bore the burden of all human failure and didn't flinch. Jesus didn't love us after we got it right. He loved us in the midst of our mess. He chose the nails. He chose the weight, and he never withdrew his presence. To love like that is to become more like him. So if you are standing in the rubble of your expectations, if you're wondering whether love is still worth it, hear this. You were made to love through the burden. You were designed to walk with someone through the valleys, and in the surrender of self, you will find the sacred strength to love as Christ loves. That is the kind of love that shapes eternity.